when I look at the Commanders, there's three areas that I could look at that they need to address sooner rather than later. The third one, it mostly has to do on the field, specifically play by play. So I'll leave that one for the end. But when it comes to position by position, the first thing I got to start off with is the quarterback. When it comes to the quarterback position with the Commanders, it has been a very fluid situation. And that's honestly something that you do not want to have at what you could say is the most important position on the offense. Because when you look at last year in particular, it was just a revolving door at the quarterback position. You had Carson Wentz, you had Taylor Heinicke, you had Sam Howell. And when you look at the current depth chart right now with the Commanders, both Carson Wentz and Taylor Heinicke, they're gone. They are no longer on this roster. And as of right now, they have Sam Howell as their potential starting quarterback, and they have Jacoby Brissett as the backup listed on their depth chart. When I look at this quarterback situation with Washington right now, I don't think it's going to be one that's going to lead to more success. I think it's going to be very similar, or it's going to be akin to what we've seen from the Commanders pretty much for the last 5-10 years, which is just inconsistent quarterback play. And it unfortunately leads to an out of sorts offense. Because when you look at the offensive categories, just in major statistical categories with the Commanders, they're essentially a bottom tier team in the passing game. And, they're only getting on average somewhere between 300 to 325 yards per game. You're going to need to do more than that. I'm not saying that you need to be the Kansas City Chiefs and go out there and average 425 yards a game. But when it comes to the offense is sputtering simply just because they just don't have a competent quarterback at that spot. So when it comes to the number 16 pick in the draft, I highly doubt that they're going to use it on a quarterback. They could address some other areas on the offense. And trust me, the next position I'm going to get to is potentially an area that they could look at in the draft. But, man, when it comes to this quarterback situation for the Commanders, this is not a winning formula. Unless Sam Howell goes out there and proves me otherwise, which, to be fair, I should give him the chance to see what he's capable of. But, just based off of what I've seen with the Commanders over the last couple of years, I don't know if Sam Howell's going to be the guy to get this team over the hump to get into the playoffs. From an offensive perspective, they have some decent playmakers here. You've got Brian Robinson Jr. in the backfield alongside Antonio Gibson. You've got Terry McLaurin. You've got Dotson. Now you have Curtis Samuel. I mean, this is not a bad wide receiving core. And then you have Logan Thomas as your tight end. Things could be a lot worse. I'll just leave it at that when it comes to their skill position on the offensive side of the ball. But if the team's going to go anywhere, it's going to have to be competent quarterback play. And I'm just not banking highly that Sam Howell's going to get it done compared to above average quarterbacks in the NFL. But there's another area that we need to focus on with the offense, and that is the offensive line. The offensive line is not making things anything better, or they're just not making things better as a whole, really. They gave up 48 sacks last year. When you look at the rest of the NFL, that's bottom tier. Now, granted, it could be a lot worse. It could be like the Broncos or the Bears where they're giving up over 55 sacks. But 48 is not a number that I imagine the coaches and the front office are happy with. Because, even if you had someone like Carson Wentz this past year or Taylor Heinicke, they just didn't have a lot of time to work with. And that was despite the fact that, the Commanders were not that bad of a team. Commanders were 8-1 last year. You switch this offensive line issue into a net positive, the Commanders are probably a playoff team. And then you combine that with the fact that their defense is solid across the board. They were top 5 in yards allowed last year. It's kind of crazy when you think about it. You wouldn't really consider the Commanders a top tier team in a major statistical category. But on the defensive side of the ball, they have that down to a science right now. And unfortunately, when it comes to the offense, they are just out of sorts. And when it comes to the offensive line, I think this is going to be an area that they're going to have to focus on going into the draft. I wouldn't be surprised if they were to draft high in the draft to potentially bring a competent piece into the offensive line going into next year just to help out with the pass protection. You got to give your quarterback time to be able to work with him. 48 sacks last year. That's just not going to get it done. And that was despite the fact that, the Commanders, realistically, they were probably only 2 wins away from making the playoffs. So, if they were to fix some of the things on the offense with the quarterback situation and then the offensive line situation, I think it could be a net positive. And then just one area that I have left to attend to is probably their turnovers. When you look at the Commanders this past year, they were bottom tier in their turnover differential. They were just turning the ball over way too frequently. Most of that had to do with the quarterback situation with Carson Wentz and Taylor Heinicke. But, you're going to have to get into a situation where you have to be in a net positive when it comes to your net turnovers throughout the season. Last year, they were subpar in that category. I believe they were like probably the 6th or 7th worst team in the NFL in that stat. So, they definitely have to clean some things up on the offense. There's no doubt about it. Defensively, this team is solid. From a passing defense perspective, this team is elite. And they have some good pass rushers with Montez Sweat. You have Chase Young. Like, the defense is not an issue here. That's why I'd never even looked at the defense when it came to the team as a whole when I was reviewing the team. But as of right now, to really just round this out, I got to focus on the quarterback situation. That definitely needs to be something that is focused on throughout the season. They definitely need to bolster this offensive line and then limit their turnovers. If they can do those things, maybe the Commanders can get into the playoffs next year. I think that that's a realistic expectation if they're able to address those things. If they stay essentially in the same boat going into next year based off of what they had last year, I think it's going to be a very similar result. They're going to finish around a 7-10 record or an 8-1 record or maybe a 9-8 record. It's going to be in an average area. That's pretty much how I see it. But if they were to address those things, I think it could be a net positive and they could potentially make the playoffs next year.